My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict and the host of the RECO12 Speaker Meeting podcast. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I'm living the relatively happy, joyous, and free life that is promised to those living in recovery, and have been very active in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013. Welcome to the 111th meeting of RECO12. We are an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are walking this same path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, co-dependency, and the anon groups. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you're hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to www.reco12.com. That's RECO12.com to learn more and to submit your email address there to receive the weekly invitations. RECO12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our Step 12 in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions. I'll put the link in the chat of the live meeting and in the show notes of the podcast if you would like to contribute. We got a few more 5-star reviews this last week, and I'm going to read one of those. Worth It Daily said, quote, "I am fairly new to recovery. The RECO12 podcasts have helped me see differently and have encouraged me to continue in recovery. It is so wonderful to hear and learn from those who have gone on before. Some days are tough, and I will turn on an episode for help on those days." Thank you so much, Worth It Daily. Now, if you, like him or her, with Worth It Daily, find value and support in RECO12, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast in Apple Podcasts. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers from their higher power. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today. It's Thomas. Thomas, and his chosen topic is addiction recovery, and mental health. And here's a little bit about him and his topic. All right. Life changes brought on by addiction recovery are very difficult. Experiencing addiction coupled with intense recovery efforts create perfect conditions for mental illness. Thomas shares his addiction recovery story, highlighting the propensities for mental illness. Thomas identifies 5 situations in his recovery affected by mental illness and shares his experience on how to manage mental illness during recovery. Take it away, Thomas. The floor is yours.
Justin, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here once again on the RECO12 podcast. I've benefited so much from this content, and I gratefully share these episodes often. Lately, I've especially enjoyed the whole series on the 12 steps, one meeting per step, meeting 71 with Father Bill W., meeting 93 from Harvey E. Again, so much good content. Thank you. Well, friends, the topic I'm grateful to share today is addiction, recovery, and mental health. The entire point of my share can be summed up as follows. Be aware. Be aware of your mental health while in recovery. Be aware of your spouse's mental health during this process, and be aware of the mental health of those you sponsor. Be aware of mental health for yourself, for those you love, and others that you assist during the healing and recovery process. As you may know, I'm not a therapist. I'm in the trenches, and I share my experiences with the desire to be helpful. Life changes brought on by addiction recovery are very difficult. Experiencing addiction, coupled with prolonged recovery efforts, which can be quite intense, create perfect conditions for mental illness for the addict and the spouse. In episode 36, I detailed my addiction to lust and various forms of sexually acting out. There, I also shared the game changers of my recovery. Today, I will share experiences from my recovery journey in the context of phases of my recovery where I felt propensity towards mental illness. First, I will identify the traditional warning signs of mental health issues. A lack of desire to do healthy things. a lack of desire to do things one usually enjoys, feeling sad or down much of the time, excessive fears or worries, extreme feelings of guilt or shame, withdrawal from family or friends, low energy, significant tiredness or sleeping problems, major changes in eating habits, excessive anger, hostility, or feelings or actions of violence, and suicidal thinking. Do any of these sound familiar to you in your recovery? For me, at various phases in recovery, I've checked all those boxes. Additionally, sometimes mental illness is coupled with physical illness, such as stomach pains, back pains, headaches, or other physical aches and pains that take longer than usual to heal, or just don't seem to heal at all. Here are the 5 phases of recovery where mental health dangers pose the greatest risks. Phase 1, the impetus to recovery, or when recovery begins. Phase 2, early recovery, which I define as 2 to 6 months into recovery. Mid-recovery, which is approximately 2 years into recovery. Phase 4, solid recovery, approximately 4 to 5 years into recovery. And phase 5, ongoing life-related mental health dangers. Mental health risks can exist during the entire addiction and recovery process, but these 5 phases I observe hold the highest propensity for mental illness and for specific reasons. I will explain these phases using my own experiences, and I'll explain why they tend to rock the boat. And then I'll give suggested solutions for each phase and some associated helpful tips and hints. Phase 1, the impetus to recovery. After 16 years of marriage, my wife had had enough. She felt 100% disconnected from me, and she made up her mind to leave the marriage. She felt destroyed, totally not good enough, and alone. She was actually in depression for years, and she didn't really exactly know why. I started recovery by deciding to tell her about my addiction behaviors in an attempt to save my marriage, to break the cycle of lying and hiding. Realizing the need for and accepting the recovery journey is a hard decision for everyone. When first entering recovery, I could see the dominoes were going to fall, and I could see the damage that I had caused to my wife. I could see the boundaries I knew were coming and the changes that my life was going to need. It was overwhelming. After I made the decision to fight for my marriage and enter recovery, the 12-step process started, and my secrets started coming out. While my wife appreciated the honesty, she also experienced a lot of anger and betrayal because of what she was finding out. I feared for my marriage. I felt heavy guilt and shame, and I struggled to separate those two. These feelings compounded into suicidal ideation. All of this was exacerbated by false thinking that I had about mental illness. I didn't really believe in mental illness. I knew other people had said they had it, but I had never experienced it, or so I thought. So I was always a bit skeptical. So when I began experiencing these overwhelming emotions, I was in denial, and I did not recognize them as mental illness. Fortunately, my wife did. And even though she was struggling with her own significant betrayal trauma, she was caring enough and encouraged me to see a therapist and get some help. So in short, I was feeling excessive fears and worries, extreme feelings of guilt and shame, withdrawing from friends and family, and having suicidal thoughts. These are all signs of mental illness. The suggested solution for this early phase 1 of recovery is to find a good therapist. My first therapist in recovery was not a certified sexual addiction therapist or CSAT. He was a mental health therapist, a pro at helping me come to grips with my suicidal thoughts. I started seeing this therapist about 4 months into recovery. I admit I could have used his help much sooner. He introduced me to meditation, breathing exercises, and led me through eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, which was very helpful for me in that initial bout of depression and anxiety that I was feeling. 6 years later, in my recovery, I continue to use many of these tools in my life. Phase 2, early recovery, or approximately 2 to 6 months into recovery. During this phase of my recovery, I was doing a lot of disclosing. Disclosure day turned into disclosure month, which turned into a disclosure quarter, in which about 80% of the truth came out. The step 4 inventory process was painful and time-consuming. Now, as a sponsor, I observe this to be true for others as well. The step 4 inventory process is another time to be very aware of mental illness. Usually this step starts in the first 6 months of recovery sometime, and this step can take months. I believe if done properly with the support of a sponsor, the step 4 inventory is life-changing and can be done safely without mental health pitfalls. Done alone, however, it can be overwhelming, discouraging, and frankly depressing, literally. So the suggested solution for this early phase of recovery is to find a sponsor as soon as you can. A sponsor can provide needed encouragement and direction to complete a step 4 inventory in a way that won't sink the boat. Also, if possible, share feelings with your spouse as you go. I found this very helpful, not using my wife as a dumping ground, but connecting with her emotionally was helpful for her to understand what I was going through and provide support. And we provided support for each other. I think it's important to explain feelings as you do the step 4 inventory. If you have a spouse, that would be appropriate if it's possible. If you are single, share your journey with trusted friends. It helps to process these feelings and emotions with others. Phase 3, mid-recovery, approximately 2 years into recovery. The first 2 years of my recovery life was full of change. We moved twice to find a fresh start, and moving in and of itself can be damaging to one's mental and physical health. Additionally, I quit my job, I endured months of unemployment, and I started a new career, all the while staying heavily involved in 12 steps. Many other significant life changes were all part of this middle phase of recovery, such as making amends and meeting with people face to face, writing more restitution letters, a polygraph test, setting boundaries for myself based on experiences I was having, and putting certain activities that were in my life on the altar for good. During this time period, I began to feel and recognize feelings of resentment creeping into my life. Thoughts such as, when are we going to get back to normal? And, okay, I'm better now. Can't we go back to the way things used to be? Were beginning to wear down my patience. This often, sadly, came out in shortness towards my wife, or in the form of pushing back against needed boundaries. In my head, I was angry, confused, and still full of anxieties. In short, I had difficulty accepting the new normal. The new normal had boundaries, dailies, a lot of humility, a lot of changes, and it meant accepting my life without yearning for the past. So some suggested solutions for this middle phase of recovery were things that I had learned earlier in my recovery, such as meditation. Meditation became very valuable for me in this phase of recovery. I began to get better at recognizing my feelings and being curious about emotions I was having instead of jumping on the train of my emotions and letting it run wild. I was able to calmly discuss these emotions with my sponsor, with my wife. Also, during this time, I gave up some of my favorite former hobbies. So I found new hobbies. I began to play basketball. I began to play disc golf. My wife and I connected intellectually by playing chess, a lot of chess. I picked up basketball, as I mentioned, and it was a game I enjoyed in my youth, but I never got really good at it. I'm still not very good at it, but it continues to be a form of healthy connection and a great way to break a sweat. I feel it is important during this mid-phase of recovery to find some kind of athletics to stay physically active and to have healthy connection with other men. Phase 4, solid recovery, 4 to 5 years into recovery. At this phase, I began to expect too much of myself. I started adding things into my life without praying about them. This led to stress and backsliding into disagreements with my wife. Again, I began pushing back on some boundaries, exuding an attitude of, I've got this. Whenever my wife was upset with me, I would relapse into fear and anxiety, scared that her anger meant that she would leave me. I also found passion for certain political causes, and these feelings became a bit too extreme, and this overemphasis also threatened to tip the scales of my mental health. The suggested solutions for this late phase of recovery are to stay active in my recovery groups, to connect with my recovery brothers, to serve as a sponsor, and to exercise my step 12 in that way, and to continue daily accountability with my wife. All of these were helpful in overcoming fears and worries. I also found that it was nice to give my wife some space. I would go camping for a weekend with my son or with other brothers in recovery, and sometimes a weekend physically separated was helpful for us both to ground as individuals before we came back and bonded as a couple. Again, I found great help by visiting my therapist. A few more times, that helped me process my feelings and have had him help me gain perspective and remind me of healthy thinking patterns. Phase 5, ongoing related mental health dangers. As we all know, life does not stop just because we enter recovery. Life marches on with its physical illnesses, financial setbacks, family relationship issues, work stress, and on and on and on. As important and all-consuming as recovery can be, it is crucial to make space for recovery efforts on an ongoing basis so as to not relapse and to not become overwhelmed with life. Several times I have been gently reminded by life to slow down, take a step back, refrain from getting involved in too many things, and really prioritize my life in order to keep my focus on my recovery, my wife, and my family. Sometimes when I was supporting or sponsoring someone, I didn't see the warning signs of mental health issues. I didn't fully grasp the significant mental health challenges that some brothers were facing. I have been too hard on some men because I didn't understand the range of complexities of mental illness. Now I do. I have changed. This has made me a much more compassionate person, and I am no longer in denial about the seriousness of mental illnesses. Last year, I had a shoulder injury that would just not heal, probably came from playing disc golf. I tried physical therapy. I tried drinking more water. I tried getting sleep. It just would not heal. At the same time, work stress was increasing. I was working more and more hours with no additional compensation. And on top of that, because of some financial setbacks I was experiencing, I perceived myself as a failure. So that's a real situation that I found myself in late last year and early this year. What helped me? One thing that greatly helped me was to visit my doctor. Another thing that helped me was to find healthy ways to escape. And again, the third thing that helped me was to go back and visit my therapist. I'm going to share a little bit more about each of those three things. I made a schedule to go visit my doctor. He asked me some questions. I answered them honestly. This was very helpful. If you see your dentist for a cleaning of your teeth every 6 months, I recommend you see your doctor at least once a year. Also, be open-minded to his suggestions, including medications that may help with anxiety or depression. Medications have helped millions of people feel better, including myself. They can help. Another suggested solution I mentioned, for those of you who know me, you know I'm a big fan of getting rid of television, movies, and unhealthy media. And while I've done this for years, avoiding media wasn't a preventative for me falling into situational depression. During that difficult time last year and early this year, I allowed myself to read some escape literature. Before, I had a boundary that I didn't read fiction. But after talking with my wife, and I agreed to do that. I read the Redwall series by Brian Jacques.
Stress and trauma happen inside of the body, which means we can heal them through the body. My name is Luis Mojica. I'm a somatic therapist, nutritionist, and host of the Holistic Life Navigation podcast. Join me each week as I teach you how to release stress and trauma through listening to your body, using nutrition, somatic experiencing, and other holistic practices. You can listen at the Holistic Life Navigation podcast or at holisticlifenavigation.com.
I read many of the Extraordinary Voyages books by Jules Verne. I found these books to be a great boon to my mental health. They were safe and they were exciting. I admit I could be doing more productive things with my time, but I found that my soul needed some downtime. I also continued playing basketball with my friends, and I continued playing disc golf. I love disc golf and basketball therapy. We talk, we throw, we use our muscles, we breathe fresh air. This helps me a lot. Lastly, and I think this is a suggestion that's been in 3 of these areas, is again, I went back to visit my therapist. I would like to give recognition to my therapist, David Thompson of ADO, who brought me a few insights, and I would like to share these with you, and I hope that they help you too. The first thing that he's big on was helping me have dedication to the fidelity of the truth. Although I was feeling like I was a failure, he helped me see that I was not a failure. I had a great education, a solid work history, a happy marriage, 2 wonderful children, and a bright future. Fidelity to the truth helped me pick myself up. The second thing he shared with me that really helped was that the present is not representative of the future. Things change, and they will continue to change. My brain was thinking, I'm this way today, and I'm always going to be this way. Or, this is my situation today, and so it's always going to be this way. I don't know how I fell into that trap of thinking that way after all I've been through, but it happened. I still have a roof over my head and food on my table. That was true yesterday, and it will be true tomorrow. To follow that, I can use the 12-step guidance, step 3, and trust in God that he will help me at any phase in my life. The third thing that David helped me acknowledge about myself was that I was being very one-dimensional. I was looking at my life from one dimension, financial, and I was overemphasizing its importance. Realizing these things that he told me helped me to crawl out from the depressing feelings and the false thinking I had about myself. I also am very grateful that I could turn again to gratitude and realize that I had my children to care for and my wife, who was wonderful, and I had a caring relationship with her as well. Still do. Thank you, David, for reminding me of these important areas. In conclusion, keep in mind that other circumstances related to recovery can also increase mental health risks, namely pre-existing conditions like bipolar, schizophrenia, chronic illness, PTSD. These can all be exacerbated by intense recovery efforts. Legal repercussions of past behaviors that include jail or prison time, loss of or change in church fellowship or faith traditions, and of course, separation or divorce situations all add complexity and stress to the mental health landscape that exists during recovery. As a recap, in phase 1, the impetus to recovery, find a therapist. In phase 2, early recovery, find a sponsor. In phase 3, mid-recovery, seek out new and healthy hobbies like meditation, basketball, or disc golf. In phase 4, late recovery, foster healthy connections with your wife through intellectual, emotional, spiritual intimacy, and with other recovery brothers and your support network. Don't hesitate to resume seeing a therapist if needed. Phase 5, ongoing life-related issues. Conduct some self-care in the form of an honest visit with your healthcare professional. If you remember nothing else from this episode, please remember this. The entire point of this share is to be aware of your mental health while in recovery. Be aware of your spouse's mental health during this process. And later, when you're sponsoring and giving support, be aware and have compassion on those that you assist in the healing and recovery process. In the process of having compassion for ourselves, please note that self-compassion is not an excuse for relapse. Relapse is not self-compassion, but self-sabotage. I call for awareness to handle recovery and mental health challenges in a peaceful, healthy, and patient-loving way. Ask thoughtful and caring questions to those around you. How are you feeling mentally? Are you having any suicidal thoughts? Do you feel overwhelmed? Have you been eating and sleeping well? How's your stress level? When is the best time for me to check in on you again? Give encouragement, be kind, have compassion on others in their recovery journey. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and my best wishes are with you in your recovery journey.
Oh, thank you so much, Thomas. I really appreciate the prescriptive manner that you present these things. It's beautiful. I love the framework and everything. It makes it so it's easy to go back on, take notes, and really reflect on. I appreciate the way you do this and the seriousness you approach this opportunity to share your experience, strength, and hope. Before we get to questions, which to our live audience, if you have questions for Thomas, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. We'll get to those and ask those and get those answered as we move along here in the next 30 minutes or so. But before we get to that, Thomas, can you share with us just a little bit about your fellowship that you work in primarily and how that helps you in your recovery journey?
Absolutely. I started attending the addiction recovery program by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about 6 years ago. I have made other forays in attending SA Lifeline and also SA in the last 6 years. I like to keep my recovery fresh, and so I like to mix things up. Lately, I have gone back to the beginning, and I am participating in an addiction recovery program meeting offered by the church here in my area as a participant.
Awesome. And real quick, what kind of experience are you having giving back in a more local kind of, I guess, not isolated, but local concentrated type situation that you may not get in a more global type situation? Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. I just love connecting with people one by one. And so this allows me an opportunity to see new people who come into these rooms, these recovery meetings, almost every week. And I love rubbing shoulders with people who are at the various phases of recovery. It reminds me of where I've been. And it gives me a lot of fulfillment and satisfaction in my life to support and to receive support from them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Thomas. All right, we're going to get right into a heavy question from our live audience and from an anonymous attendee. The question is, what actions would you take first if you were having suicidal thoughts?
I would open up to someone. I did feel those suicidal thoughts, as I mentioned early on, and I did tell my wife. And from there, she was able to help me to see somebody who could help me process that a little better. Don't keep it in. Don't keep it a secret. As the 12 steps say, we are only as sick as our secrets, and that applies to recovery as well as to mental health issues.
Yeah. One thing that I find pretty common when talking with people in recovery is often and I'll just use me here. Often I feel like if I'm reaching out to somebody, I'm becoming a burden on them by sharing the heavy things going on in my life that, I'm really having these suicidal thoughts here. I feel like I'm being a burden on them by doing that. But when people reach out to me, I never, ever go, what a burden. But in my own mind, it's something harder to say, no, I am a burden on others. What is your take on that and experience with that type of mindset?
Very similar. I feel the same way. When people have reached out to me with their feelings of being overwhelmed or having suicidal thoughts, or I feel honored. I never feel burdened when people come to me and share that. I'm like, wow, this person trusted me to come to me. And then I always feel an empathy and want to help as much as I can. But you're right. I have felt that too, that I don't want to tell anybody because everybody else is so busy, and I'm a nobody in essence. So I don't want to burden them. I've felt very similar.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to go to one of the last things you shared, Thomas, is relapse is not self-compassion, but it's self-sabotage. For someone who is in the pains of withdrawal or pains of life and just seeking an escape, that can really feel like, what, if I just get a drink, if I just use, if I just act out here, it will relieve everything, and it will have this, well, if self-compassion isn't the word that's used, it'll be a relief that's used. How would you approach that for yourself if you're in those pains of, I really need some sort of relief right now, and acting out in whatever way would relieve that, but it's going to self-sabotage in the long run? How do you approach that?
Yeah, great question. So for me, in my pre-recovery life, I absolutely coped with lust hits and pornography and sexually acting out, and it does provide relief, but it's very short and it's fleeting. And I've trained my brain now to see those activities as not as pleasurable, but as painful, because they truly are in the long term more painful. And so now when I am faced with depression or feelings of sadness or overwhelmed or anger, my brain just does not go there, because that's not adding, to me, it's not adding pleasure anymore to my life. My brain now says those things will only add pain to my life. So that's my mental approach to those situations.
So you've been able to take a longer term look at things rather than just in the moment at that time. Is that what you're saying? Kind of being able to see, hey, this is going to cause pain in the end.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not relief. I love the self-sabotage. It is not self-compassion. That will go up on my wall of quotes. So, all right. We have another question that just came in from our live audience. This is from Zach. Zach says, what would you say, or what advice would you offer to someone who is in recovery and working the 12 steps and who has gained some sobriety and then relapses?
A higher consumption of vegetables may cut your odds of developing depression by as much as 62%. An American Cancer Society study found that women who sit for more than 6 hours a day have a 40% higher death rate. Hi, My name is Maya Acosta, and I'm a health and wellness educator and host of the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast. Join me and the amazing people that I get to talk to as I set out to learn how to improve our quality of life and increase our longevity. You can listen at the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast or at healthylifestylesolutions.org.
Thank you for your question, Zach. This is a really excellent question, and relapse can be very discouraging. So I would encourage, again, this is a great reason to have a sponsor, because a good sponsor will help you to pick yourself back up, will help you see that you're a good man, that you have a lot of potential, and that this isn't the end of your story. A relapse is just a learning opportunity. So finding a sponsor, getting back on the boat as soon as can, using the relapse as an opportunity to learn what went wrong and how things can go different in the future.
Yeah, thank you. I had something, but it's gone. So thank you for that answer. And yes, I agree. Here we are. So in your phases, in many of those phases, and this relates to that question and the answer, I think some of the things that you discussed were some of the self-assuredness or confidence that the self-confidence that comes in that makes me go, you know what, I'm okay. I got this. New normal stuff. Hey, I can go back and watch that type of show again. I can go and, to use a big book analogy, mix some whiskey in my milk. It's not going to hurt me. I'm good. I've got this figured out. I've got this. So, in that vein, if someone's moving along, they've started their working their steps, gotten a little bit of sobriety behind them, and then relapse, do you see that self-confidence maybe coming in as part of that, saying, hey, I got this, I can mix an ounce of whiskey in my milk or anything like that?
Everybody's situation is so different. For one, it could be exactly that. For another, it could just be that they never set up proper boundaries in the first place. For a third, maybe they're just haven't hit their rock bottom yet. It's hard to give a blanket answer to that, but relapses are an opportunity for learning and to evaluate what went wrong.
All right, thank you. And you brought up boundaries. One of the questions that I wrote down here goes back to when you were talking about speaking with someone else, your spouse, sponsor, someone else that has your best interest in mind. Should there be, or how would you draw the line or the boundary between things and how you discuss things with your sponsor and how you discuss things with your spouse and other close family members? Is there a difference there? And if so, how do you define that?
I think it's pretty different for everybody. My situation was that I was very open with my spouse. 100% honesty was a condition of our staying married. That's not true for everybody, but it was true for me. And so I would share everything with my wife and share everything with my sponsor, and still do to a large degree. Not relapsing and facing temptations in a more healthy way has made that process a lot easier. I don't fear talking to my wife at night about these things. I can bring them up, and because I'm in a pretty healthy pattern that way. But yeah, I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah, thank you. You talked a lot about, mental health. That was part of this thing. What does your mental health or connection routine look like on a daily basis? Do you have like a daily routine to ground yourself in your mental health and your connection with your higher power and with others? And if so, what does that look like?
That's a great question, Justin. I'm gonna give a little bit of a longer answer to this one, because my recovery, I'm a very disciplined person. I'm strict with myself. So for 5 or 6 years in my recovery, I had dailies. It ranged from 8 to 12 dailies, and I would change them up every 6 months or so. And I was very rigorous with my recovery and very strict with myself. Some of that was because at the beginning, it was because I felt it was communicated to me that if I relapsed, I would lose my marriage. But then later it became more of, I need to do this for myself. And I did turn the corner on that. But all of that to say that I was very strict in my regimen, getting rid of media, doing my dailies, setting up a lot of boundaries. And I feel like where I'm at now, after some of the situational depression that I've gone through in the last 6 to 10 months, has made me be a little bit more self-compassionate on myself. Again, not with regards to relapsing, but I'm not keeping an Excel spreadsheet to track all of my 12 dailies every day anymore. I'm not, I'm allowing myself to read fiction literature and escape a little bit more. So I'm exercising some of those forms of self-compassion on myself. And that's okay. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I have another question. This is from Robbie. And first off, he says, thank you for your spirit. Appreciate that, Thomas. And the question is, what have you noticed or discovered about your life's emotional foundation over the different phases of your journey?
No, that is such a good question. I've learned that I am human, that I have strengths and weaknesses like everybody else, that I am prone to egoism, and that I need constant humility, and that I am of myself, I'm nothing, that I really, truly do need my higher power in order to be my best self. Thank you for that question, Robbie.
Yeah, and what freedom or strength has that provided to you that you now see yourself as others with strengths and weaknesses, just like everybody else? Has that made a change in your life as to how you view others in addition to how you view yourself?
It's a lot less stressful. When I saw myself constantly in competition with everyone around me, I was always on guard, or I was always a little high strung, or there's a lot of negative emotions that can be associated with that. But realizing that I am not steering the boat alone is very comforting. And sometimes I admit that whatever I'm facing is just too big for me, and I can let go of the wheel, and I can trust that the boat's not going to completely crash.
Yeah, thank you. And that same concept for me has been a game changer. When I find myself slipping into comparison, whether I'm comparing up, oh man, I wish I was as good as that person, they have it all put together, or I'm comparing down, oh man, at least I'm not there. The realization that they are just like me with strengths and weaknesses, and I'm just like them with strengths and weaknesses, and that my higher power and their higher power loves them and loves me just as much as anybody else. And there, but for the grace of God, if I'm comparing down and saying, man, I'm better than that, there, but for the grace of God, go I. Because
I want to mention something about comparison. I think it can be very damaging to one's mental health. A close friend told me this quote: comparison is the fuel of pride and the thief of joy. So if, like you said, if I'm comparing myself to somebody who I perceive as better than me, it's the thief of joy. If I'm comparing myself to someone who I perceive as lower than me, it's the fuel of pride. And those are both unhealthy thinking patterns that can lead to myself feeling prideful or feeling less than.
Yeah, I love that. I love that quote. I hadn't heard the fuel of pride side of it, and that adds to that quote for me. Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that you mentioned, Thomas, in your talk was putting things on the altar of your good, I think is how you worded it, or for your good. Describe a little bit more what that means to you, putting something on the altar in recovery and in mental health. What does that look like?
Well, I think that can be a hard thing. Altars are associated with burning and loss, losing something. For me, I had a hobby that I enjoyed very much, and when I put that on the altar, I stopped doing that hobby, and I sometimes miss that hobby. But it's important to, when we burn something and sacrifice something and leave something behind or give it up, that we replace it with something that's healthy. Or and for me, that was another athletic activity. So that action of needing to sacrifice something to leave the past in the past and move forward in my life, it can be painful. And so that's how it can relate to mental health issues, is if there's resentment there, or if there's a hole in my life because I didn't replace it with something else healthy, then that can lead to mental illness. But I think everybody in recovery puts something on the altar at some time.
Oh, I love that. And just recently, I had a little bit of an insight into this for myself too. I was pondering on what that means to leave something at the altar and the history of that. And we look at the Old Testament, when somebody brought an animal, to the altar to sacrifice for whatever purpose it was, they didn't leave that animal thinking, oh, I'll come back and I'll get some of the meat or the hide or something for it afterwards. I'm not going to be able to come back and get anything of that animal. I'm giving that animal up for the purpose that I'm sacrificing that thing for. And as I bring things to the altar in my own life, in my own recovery, in my own mental health, I need to be willing to say, okay, this really is, I'm leaving it here and not expecting anything of that original thing back. And I need to be willing to take what and create what can replace that, or even become even magnified from what I gave up. And I found that very interesting. Any further thoughts on that concept from that, Thomas?
No, not at this time. I think sacrifice is important in recovery, to put off the old us and move forward with the new us.
Yeah, and that word is such a sacrifice. It's such a harsh, blunt word, and so many. Well, I know that I'm hesitant to do it, but man, what a beautiful concept it is to be able to walk away and say, okay, I'm giving that up with no expectation of ever returning to it, and trusting that the future will not be representative of the present. What I'm giving up, the future will be even better than that. You talked about slowing down, and what is a good thing that you have recently been able to say no to, in this process of slowing down, that you've been able to say, you know what? No, that is not a good thing for me in my life right now, in order to focus on a better or a more important thing in your own life.
That's a good question. Well, this is kind of a funny example, because the thing that I put out is actually recovery related. I have been facilitating at a group that was made up of young single adults. And that was a fantastic group, a really well attended 12-step group. But when I changed employment recently and I have a lot going on at home, I realized that I needed to stay a little closer to home, and I didn't need the additional responsibilities of being an active facilitator. So I just made the decision that my focus is going to be on my wife and my family and on my new job. And I bowed out of facilitating, and I'm happy just participating in my local area.
Yeah. So even in that case where the sacrifice that's being made is a good thing, and one that, if I'm overly, how do I put this? I can become too fanatical even in recovery. Yeah. And that's something that I really battle with. myself. I find
I think we're both guilty of that, Justin.
Yeah. When somebody says, "Hey, Justin, I need somebody to help me in this area of recovery," I'm like, I'm there. And then about halfway through, I'm like, I'm really giving up a lot with my family or with something else that I could and possibly should be doing, instead of what you mentioned, instead of taking it to my higher power and saying, God, is this something that I should do? I just make the assumption of, hey, the call has come. I need to run and drop everything and go do it. Such a hard concept to grasp. And I admire that you have been doing that.
Not perfectly, but yeah, life goes on.
Amen. All right. So before we wrap things up here, Thomas, do you have any other words of wisdom or anything else you'd like to share with us?
I just want to reemphasize my last message is that I have made mistakes in sponsoring and giving support to others because I did not understand mental illness. Please be compassionate. Please ask the questions of those that you support and sponsor, and be aware of the mental health of those that you love all around you, family and friends as well.
Thank you so much, Thomas. All right. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your questions, or if you have others, go to RECO12.com and join in our community, or on the website, or join our private Facebook group and ask those questions and answer other questions that'll come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you've not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. Great way to work your 12th step in sharing this message with others. And next week, we'll be hearing from one of my mentors in recovery and in my connection with my higher power, Father Bill W., who was referenced earlier in this meeting. We'll be back again. He's an alcoholic with over 50 years sobriety and a leading voice in the Step 11 practice of two-way prayer. His chosen topic will be Carl Jung and the recovery journey. And I'm looking forward to hearing from him. He's got some great stuff. And he's going to share his experience, strength, and hope next week. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the second step prayer that Thomas will lead us in. Have at it, Thomas.
The second step prayer. Heavenly Father, I know in my heart that only you can restore me to sanity. I humbly ask that you remove all twisted thought and addictive behavior from me this day. Heal my spirit and restore in me a clear mind. This I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Thomas. Everybody, come trudge this happy road with us. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of